Ocarina of Time's trial dungeons have had quite a bashing so far in this list. I mean, this wasn't because they were badly made as such, but because they were simply too easy and didn't really do anything special with their design. And sadly, Dodongo's cavern is no different.
The Dodongo's cavern, like the other starter dungeons in Ocarina of Time, doesn't really bring out a lot in order to gently nudge Zelda players forward without taking away the fun or being uncomfortable, which is understandable and why it's so easy. Even though there isn't a lot of details to remember for compared to the adult dungeons, I had a good time with it, and overall enjoyed how mellow the environment is, and don't have a complaint about it.
Yeah, in some ways I agree. It's certainly the least threatening of any fire dungeon that I've played, and I did like it for that. However, it does still suffer from the same problem that all of the trial dungeons suffer from. But as I said earlier, they didn't really have much of a choice. Also, although the item was fairly standard, being bombs, it was used pretty well, especially when you drop them into the Dodongo's eyes and enter its mouth. That really was a great moment that reminded me that Ocarina of Time truly was a game like no other.
Every video game has to face it, the last level. The question is, can it wrap everything up into a nice conclusion, or just as likely scatter the pieces at the player's feet for a pile of disappointment? Well, the Sky Keep seems to be one thrown up into the air at number 27.
As I mentioned in part 1, final dungeons do tend to be more combat based than previous ones, and in a way, I'm glad that Skyward Sword tried something different, but all it ended up being to me was a selection of dumbed down versions of the respective other temples in the game. However, unlike other people, I did enjoy the idea of moving rooms around, even if it was a little confusing.
Well, I'm an Oracle of Ages fan, so bring on the puzzles and confusion. I welcome it. Though it does have its down moments of not really trying anything new with the environments themselves, keeping to the same enemies and equipment you've been using throughout the game. But overall, it's a nice mix of keeping it familiar yet original at the same time, so definitely a good dungeon in my books.
We'll talk about a deja vu. While Jason had his Palace of Twilight, it seems that I have my Snowhead from Majora's Mask, popular with me, but not with the rest.
Unfortunately, all of Majora's Mask dungeons tanked for me. Not in the dungeon design, don't get me wrong, because they're all fantastic dungeons in themselves, but because of the time limit. You see, with Snowhead when I was younger, I didn't know you had to knock the platform sections out, and it looked like natural parts of the platform, so I didn't think to hit them. Because of this, on my first run, I had to restart this dungeon about 6 times, so I can't say I regard this dungeon too much, despite it even being my favorite of the 4. Man, Majora's Mask, just how much I want to kick you over the cliff sometimes.
As for me, I really like the way fire and ice were used here, and I loved the Goronsu. It really made this dungeon for me, and without it, I doubt Snowhead would even have cracked the top 15. And while Jason wasn't a huge fan of the platforms, I thought they were a pretty cool way to end a very cool dungeon. It also doesn't hurt that Goats, even though he doesn't count for the ranking, is one of my favourite Zelda bosses in existence.
This is it. This is where we die. This is the dungeon that will tear us apart into a 2-on-2 battle. 2 of us really liked it and put it at the top of our list, and the other 2 thought it was completely boring and sunk the ship, balancing it out to the middle. And judging from my tone, I think you know which side I'm on.
Wow, talk about everyone's opinions being different. While the 2 Brits, that's Jason and I, both love the dungeon's atmosphere, design, and especially the item, it looks like Jason and Warren from overseas in America didn't feel the same way. Myself, I think the fact that the dungeon's primarily outside was a great idea, and as I said, the item, the Mogma Mitts, allowed you to dig and crawl underground, which for me was just brilliant. One other thing I think I should add, the Leap of Faith, absolutely brilliant, a very memorable moment in Skyward Sword.
I actually talked to Warren about this a couple of months back about this, and the 2 Americans here think this place is absolutely Dolesville. I felt like I was taking a slight jog 90% of the time I was in this dungeon, and nothing happened except for that tiny moment of jumping off the platform and doing a little bit of Pac-Man puzzles. They shouldn't have done a second fire dungeon. The Earth Temple was great, the Fire Sanctuary, and both of our opinions over here think this place was absolutely unnecessary. Sorry viewers, but the show is just beginning. There's plenty more dungeons where opinions are going to burn our butts along with the ones we're going to be happy joy on. It's how the Zelda universe of opinions work, and we and you guys will agree or disagree with us. But we still respect ours and yours opinions.
Wind Waker certainly has its fair share of controversy in the Zelda universe. The sailing was controversial, the art style was controversial, and the late game Triforce quest was frowned upon by many. The dungeons, while not a strong point for me, are still mostly good, but one dungeon that none of us can agree on is the Wind Temple.
The Wind Temple wasn't a favorite of mine at first. The music sounded a little monotonous, but over time I started to get used to it and warm up to it along with the environment over time. One thing I say I didn't enjoy was Makar. While I understand a lot of Zelda players found him adorable, just felt a little finicky to work with and didn't enjoy using him, but otherwise, awesome temple.
Well, many people say that first impressions count, and that could be the reason why the Wind Temple wasn't among my favourites. The music annoyed me to no end, and as you said, Jason, Makar was so annoying to handle I was sick of him and his so-called flying controls by the end. That being said, the combat was great, and the item, the hookshot, is one of my favourite items in the whole series. A brilliant idea with great mechanics, but they were so poorly executed that it simply wasn't a dungeon I wanted to play again.
Yay! My favorite Ocarina of Time temple. Really looking forward to this. I like relaxing dungeons as well as challenging ones, and this one has so much charm behind it in the environment and just how well it's aged over my entire 15 years of history playing Zelda.
Well, after the Forest Temple and the Water Temple, most people had a pretty high expectation for Ocarina of Time's next adult dungeon. In my opinion, it was everything I could have hoped for. While the Forest Temple was eerie and dark and the Water Temple was mysterious and confusing, the Fire Temple was bright and lively. This ended up being a great contrast that again reminded me what a special game Ocarina of Time is. It's just a shame that the item, the Megaton Hammer, was barely used once the dungeon was finished. On the other hand, this did give the player more freedom, as it allowed you to beat all the game's other temples without even entering fire at all. So all in all, it was a great dungeon and definitely on par with the previous two adult dungeons in the game.
Wait, Joe, are you telling me you did the Fire Temple after the Water Temple? You're supposed to do the Fire Temple first!
Really? I always did water before fire. Well, you don't see that in other Zelda games, do you?
Well, brownie points to Ocarina of Time for being non-linear with its dungeons compared to the other games. The nerve, sheesh. Alright, my turn with the Fire Temple. Is the Fire Temple hard? No. Does it have puzzles? Not exactly to the extent of other temples. Is it straightforward compared to the other dungeons? Yes, it is. But I don't care about any of that. The Fire Temple to me is like sitting around a campfire. It's so simple that others may not like the lack of sophistication like Jitten and Warren here, but to me it doesn't have to be that complex to enjoy it. It's so comfortable with its little details every time I walk through this dungeon that I can't help but feel a small flare of warmth and nostalgia every time I walk through it. The visuals are engaging and great to look at, the music is very subtle and effective in its execution, and I have to admit I like hearing that kerlunk sound every time the Megaton Hammer came down. And overall, loved it and always look forward to it in my Ocarina of Time adventures.
This list really is full of contrasting opinions, isn't it? And there are many more where they came from. Let's listen to the two opposing sides of the Tower of Gods from Wind Waker.
This is my third worst dungeon, and I don't have a positive to say about it, so brace yourselves for those who happen to like it. The music is really erratic and it's fading, and I don't like its long, boisterous wailing of notes. It's really distracting and loud. Next, this dungeon has a lot of follow the leader escort puzzles I hate doing in bringing these statues to the main room or taking items to their respective areas. Lastly, the spontaneous water level gimmick is not something to highlight from my perspective, especially in that it makes some parts underwhelming to get some progress done. Overall, loved every Wind Waker dungeon, but not this one. I'll pass, thanks.
Okay, I'll admit it. The statue parts didn't exactly pass for excitement. I hated the jumping mechanics, and I hated having to wait for the water level to rise every single time. But that bridge building puzzle at the beginning of the dungeon, so frustrating. But the music was brilliant for me. I love the idea of having a final test from the gods, and the bow, along with the hookshot on the beetle, is among my favourite items in the series.
Skyward Sword, you are so middle ground for me. Be my middle Zelda game out of the 5. You balance out your positives and negatives to be that centerpiece there, but I have to admit, you know how to pull a great first dungeon, I'll give you that much.
Out of all of the series' first dungeons, Skyview Temple is probably my favourite. While the forest from Twilight Princess may have had more of a creative design, Skyview did a much better job of easing you into the game while still offering fun, unique design and a fantastic item, the beetle. I really hope they bring it back in future games, don't you, Jason?
You want to go there, huh? Okay, well, since I'm editing this project, how about I put some words into your mouth? I want you to tell me you love dog food, that you love it and cherish its flavor in your mouth. Do you love dog food?
Yeah.
Now I want you to envision that taste. Can you feel those blissful texture of those delicious brown nuggets sloshing around on your tongue? Now I want you to go have some while I finish up here. Okay, boy?
Okay.
Rule 1. Don't insult the editor. Things just won't work out for you. Alright, the Skyview Temple, I have to say it's a decent temple for me. Love the mysteriousness of the music and its foreboding atmosphere for a first dungeon, I have to admit, which is where its charm comes from for me. Coming into Skyward Sword fresh my first time, it makes me cautious how they'll execute the dungeons compared to the last Zelda dungeons, and frankly it didn't disappoint. Joe did bring up a point is that I'm not a fan of the beetle at all, which is what dragged it down in my books. It's more of a gimmick that breaks the pacing for me in the game, and I didn't like it too much. It's all on personal taste, and probably about as delicious as that dog food Joe is about to have a gourmet meal on over there. I get a feeling part 3 is going to get a lot more interesting. By the way, everyone, I didn't mean that in a mean-spirited way, and Joe didn't say any of that for the dog food. It was just a friendly joke, everyone. I know it was obvious, but it was just good fun, so don't take it too seriously.